Okay, so part 3 for May the 21st. So I was saying that the Native Americans have some very sad struggles, and one of those is substance abuse. Because of the lifestyle of struggling to make a living, struggling to have enough food in difficult crop years when crops aren't producing well, or the animals can't graze well because of dryness, drought, or this kind of thing. The people have often turned to particularly alcohol, but also now drugs, and brought that up into the reservation, and it has become a very serious health and mental health, physical health, mental health problem on reservations, particularly among young people. So there are a lot of social workers and missionaries, people who spend time on the reservations trying to help these folks overcome some of these difficulties and give assistance with helping them to build a better quality of life. Reservations will have schools. They will function in those ways. Again, the quality of education is often described to be below standard. Just in many ways, there's some unfortunate aspects of the lives of these people. And so this coronavirus has hit them uniquely hard. And that's what we're going to read about together. And I think I'm just going to have us read paragraph by paragraph, and I'll make a few comments. I'll highlight vocabulary as we go, so you just be ready to maybe make some notes in the margins around the article. It is a fairly long article, so I don't know that we will finish it today. We'll go as far as we can. Oh, by the way, you did notice in the title, I think, that the words in the title are not all capitalized. And that is because this is actually a sentence. Now, it's not punctuated, okay? But it is a sentence. For Native Americans, coronavirus looks heartbreakingly familiar. You would have a period there. Remember, writer's license. Remember that articles of news kind of have a little more what we call leeway. They have, the writers can do things a little more the way they want. And that's why this article is titled in the style that it is. Indigenous people are the first North Americans. They have faced many diseases throughout history. When the first Americans came, and then later the settlers came, I think we talked about in class that one of the things that the white man brought to the Native Americans was disease. Things that had never been here before were now being introduced to the society. So this is all through history. They've faced many diseases. Leela Oman was an infant in Nome, Alaska during the 1918 Spanish flu, in which millions died throughout the world. The death rate for Indigenous Americans during that pandemic was 4 times higher than other Americans. In Nome, people had just gotten a telephone line in 1918, so residents had advanced warning. All right, it took, and always has taken longer for technology all through the development of technology, for this technology to reach the reservations. But in the case of the 1918 Spanish flu, the people in Nome, Alaska, in her community of indigenous folks, had received a telephone line into the community, and so they were given notice of this flu epidemic, or what became pandemic. In a 1996 interview, Oman spoke about her town's response to the warning about the flu. Dog teams traveled around telling different towns not to travel, she said. At one of the towns, there were guards with weapons. So this sounds very archaic to us, that they would have to spread the news by using dogs pulling sleds and going miles and miles to little towns all around the area to spread this news, because they had the telephone line, the one telephone line that brought the word to them, and then they had to make sure that that word got around so that people wouldn't travel outside of their community. What does that sound like? Sounds like an early stay-at-home type order, right? And they often did it at their own peril, peril meaning, at their own risk, because some of the communities weren't as welcoming as others. One, in fact, having guards with weapons. So there was a sense among whatever group of Native Americans that was, that anybody from the outside might have poor intentions. The self-protection from 100 years ago is playing out again now. Indigenous communities across North America are fighting coronavirus, or COVID-19. Diseases have long played a tragic role for North America's indigenous communities. Illnesses like smallpox, the measles, and flus have wiped out many of the population over hundreds of years. Now, with coronavirus, indigenous communities face severe challenges again. Many indigenous people who live on reservations are old, have high rates of disease, and often live in remote areas or remote locations. They also rely on health systems that do not have enough funding. Additionally, for some Native tribes, older people are the last sources of vanishing languages and cultures. We know with coronavirus that certainly the elderly people are among the highest risk group. And on the reservations, there are many elderly people who have not only age working against them, but they also have physical ailments. And because they don't have the access to health care that we enjoy in our society, in most of America, we enjoy the opportunity to be able to take care of ourselves, to see doctors, to see dentists, to have medications, to have procedures and surgeries that we need. But this is not as available. And so we see that that these folks are dying at a higher rate with coronavirus. And one of the real sadnesses about that, as is true with any loss of the older generation, is we lose their stories, don't we? We lose the history that they have lived and shared, or would have shared had they not died. In Native cultures, that includes languages and cultural ways of doing things, rituals and so forth. So that has been very much hurt through this recent crisis. Every issue that is true elsewhere in the United States is being magnified in Indigenous communities, says Allison Barlow. She leads the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. Now, you're familiar with the Johns Hopkins, I think, from the news hospital system. It's based in Baltimore, Maryland, but it is very well known around the country, and there are satellite type of hospitals and clinics and so forth in other parts of the country that are Johns Hopkins related. And there is a Center for American Indian Health at Johns Hopkins as well. But they're saying, you know, when something has been magnified, it is so much more. In this case, the disease is, and all the problems that go along with the coronavirus disease are magnified for these people. We have been amazingly blessed, I guess, because if we need groceries, we have ways of going and picking them up curbside or having them delivered to our door. Same with medications. We have ways that we can order things that we need. We can do telehealth and talk to a doctor. I actually had to do that last week with a spider bite, and it was so convenient to be able to show the bite to the doctor on the video screen. Amazing. Okay, but problems that aren't so much problems for us are big problems for people who live in these settings. Now, Indigenous communities have acted faster than some state and national governments. They have done similar shutdowns as 100 years ago. Their response has revealed a remarkable endurance. Okay, so what this is telling us is that in some cases, once they got the word of coronavirus, they closed their communities, limited travel, things even faster perhaps than the U.S. government. And they did this to try to save their people, to try to give them at least a chance to endure this situation, knowing that if someone got sick, it would be very difficult to get them to the proper resources for care. The scope of the challenge. A lack of testing for coronavirus is a problem across North America. Now, this was written 3 weeks ago, I think. The date was about 3 weeks ago. We know now there's finally testing, right, in most places. But it's probably slower getting to the Indigenous people on reservations. It is an additional problem for Indigenous communities. Their health systems were already stressed. Testing shortages make it hard to get an accurate count of the number of coronavirus cases among the Indigenous populations. Page 2. The number of cases that have been recorded may not include the large Indigenous population living off the reservation. The majority of Indigenous people live outside of reservations. So while there are still many on reservations, there are a majority who live outside of the reservations. They still tend to live oftentimes in closely connected communities. However, as I said in the beginning, you will find Indigenous people in all parts of our country mixing in and being a part of schools and churches and jobs and so forth. Socially, culturally, they may still find one another to continue to celebrate their heritage. Reservations are a big concern. Reservations are home to the most at-risk populations, including older people and those with long-term illnesses. So far, most coronavirus cases are concentrated in a few reservations. Reservations struggle with many challenges. Health facilities are understaffed and do not have enough resources. Homes are crowded with several family members. Systems like transportation and technology are not in great condition. Some reservations lack drinking water, while others lack lack water clean enough for hand washing. This sounds like a very third world kind of thing, and in some cases that's what it looks like. And I think that it's very shameful, personally, that these people are living in the United States and still struggling with basic needs. But there are lots of issues that are involved in the struggles between the United States government and the reservations. And this has been a stumbling block, okay? These issues have been a stumbling block for progress. The Canadian government has sent hand sanitizer, masks, and gloves to Indigenous communities. The U.S. government, meanwhile, has designated more than $8 billion to help Indigenous communities. Because of treaty agreements, governments have a responsibility to provide health care to tribes. Yet this funding comes after governments have provided little help with tribes' health systems in the past. So there has been a recent surge of money sent to the reservations to help in this crisis, just as there has been money sent to all parts of the United States during coronavirus and to its citizens. However, when there has not been adequate resource and care, health care, then people are already in a negative kind of situation. They already have many problems, and if the funding had been there all along and the help had been there all along, the people would be better able to endure. But because of maybe not having clean water, not having ongoing care for health issues, then the situation was already bad. All right, we're going to pause at the end of this section, and then we'll finish the last part next week. So we're on paragraph that begins with the Pine Ridge. The Pine Ridge Reservation is in South Dakota and Nebraska. There is only one healthcare facility on the reservation. The population is almost 20,000, yet the health facility has 45 beds and 16 staff members, according to the Indian Health Service. So you can see that that's very inadequate, right? There's no way that many, many people who are ill at one time in pandemic could be cared for in this particular healthcare facility on this particular reservation. The echoes of past deadly diseases are hard to ignore. Here is this deadly virus, and they don't have what they need to contain it, said Barlow. All right. We'll finish with defending the reservation and care for elders, those two sections, next week. In the meantime, you might want to do some other reading about the Native Americans at this time, or lifestyle on the reservations. Might be interesting reading for you. Thank you, and I will see you next week.